Hello, everyone. Today is 20th of August, 2017, and we are on the air with Tate Ulsaker from New Zealand. Today's topic of our discussion is Business in Russia Weekly, developments, trends, lucrative niches for international players. And I'm very much happy that Tate did manage to join me today, and I would like him to start our discussion. Then I follow up with weekly news and trends which might be of interest to potential market entrants or anyone dealing with this market.
Okay, thank you, Stan. I just want to report on the continued insanity of the U.S. sanctions against Russia, which are unjust, and frankly, they're criminal, and they're on a war footing. So the U.S. has many different ways of fighting wars. And let's remember, when I say the U.S., I'm not talking about American citizens like I used to be before I renounced citizenship and came to New Zealand. I'm talking about the corporate structures that have taken over the U.S., including the presidency, the industry, the banks, the Supreme Courts, and basically every big institution of the empire is no longer representing people anymore. It's representing corporate interest and globalists' interests, which is over the corporate interests. The U.S. has started off accusing Russia, the biggest target for resource acquisitions, of invading Ukraine, annexing Crimea, not having fair and open elections, shooting down an airliner, involvement in Syria, all of which the U.S. has done and Russia has not done, or if Russia did do, Russia wasn't doing to the extent that the U.S. was doing. So the U.S. is the one invading country after country, including Ukraine. The U.S. is involved in many crimes that are much worse than shooting down an airliner, which Russia didn't do, but they did shoot down an Iranian airliner before. Now the U.S. has gone mad. We're destroying monuments. So we have a history in the U.S., and history is there for a reason, and monuments are there to remind us of history. They're being destroyed. Who else destroyed monuments? ISIS destroys monuments. Taliban destroys monuments in Afghanistan, Syria, Iraq. The Ukrainian Nazis that are supported by George Soros's structures in order to create Maidan and staff the government there with the help of the State Department, they're destroying monuments. Why this effort to destroy monuments? It's very simple. One of the tactics for taking over a country includes eliminating the history. So when you lose your national identity, then you no longer are as committed to fighting. And this is a multi-generational thing, but it also has an effect on the generation that it is happening to. I've been paying attention to Russia for a long time. I started Direct Info in 1997. I first went in 1993. Russia is very important for me. I married Russia, literally. I have a wife and children who are multilingual. I pretend to be multilingual sometimes. I'm a pro-Russian person to the core. I don't like what's happening to all these countries. But Russia, it strikes me particularly sensitively because I do have friends, business, family in Russia, and I'm myself Russian, in fact. Although I wasn't born there, I feel that way. What we're seeing is a meltdown of the U.S., and it's not Russia's fault. It's not any country's fault. It's an empire collapsing under the own weight of its top heavy. It's coming down, and this is one of the effects. So I'd like to go to one of the writings of a friend of mine. His name is A.J. Goyle, and I'll finish with this short reading of what A.J. Goyle has written. A.J. founded and was the owner of Moscow Times. So you may have heard of Moscow Times, the English paper from back in the 90s. AJ is also, like me, very passionate pro-Russian. He lives in Cyprus. I live in New Zealand. AJ's from India. I'm from America. We both have met in Russia. And he has a very sympathetic and passionate description of Russia today, as he witnessed it. He's been there recently, and he's was watching the marches, and he was watching the March of the Immortals, and he was watching how Russians have changed socially. They've become more united under this pressure of sanctions, under these aggressive positions that the U.S. and the globalists have taken. And he has said that with the march now, they're holding the pictures. Everyone's holding pictures. I've seen must be hundreds of thousands of people in the streets holding pictures of dead and lost relatives and friends in the war. And he said that's a new thing. I didn't know that. And then he makes a comment which I thought was very interesting. No matter how powerful, expensive, and well-supplied the militaries and alliances amassing on Russia's border, talking about NATO and US powers coming up against Russia's border, Russians are now determined that they will never fight a war of aggression from the west or south of their land. Talking about historically, that has been the areas of fighting. And Russian pride and confidence that they won't be doing that again. They will get in a lethal retaliation against any aggressor first. So when I read that, I thought that's probably true. In order to consolidate Russia on the very top where the generals are, there's probably has been, he's a very insightful person, AJ. I'm not saying he has insider information. Probably there has been a communication saying, you know what, we're not going to do it again. Don't worry. We're Russians. We're not going to relive that nightmare. So with that, I close. It's one of those things. I think Russia's doing everything right. They're not being confrontational. They're letting the U.S. collapse under its own weight. They're letting the U.S. lie and make mistakes and make sanctions, do whatever they want to, and be aggressive. Stay back. They'll find. It's like the bully in the classroom. He's picking on you and pushing on you. If you don't fight, eventually he starts to fight with someone else, and he keeps going. And that's what's happening. Bullies eventually find the karma that they deserve, and that's what's going to happen here. It's my prediction. It's my hope that Russia will stay out of a direct confrontation that gets them to look publicly in the world's eye as if they're wrong. So far, Russia is looking in the global eye, publicly, on the net, and in most reasonable people's minds, as the defensive and the right side of the argument. Thank you very much, Stan, for having me on. That's all I wanted to say. Maybe also just to add, there are big opportunities in Russia, and I'd like to, as Stan has been talking about that, I'd like to elaborate on that at some point in the future. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you very much, Tate. It's really valuable input. After all, your view as you call yourself Russian, which is pretty much true, but you still keep the Western mindset, but you can see the world from a few angles, you know. And most of people in their countries, including me, by the way, whether I like it or not, I'm biased pretty much. You know, I'm Russian, so I'm quite protective with someone disturbs my interests, if you like, and that probably is not the neutral look at things or businesses, what's going on here. All right, let's get back to the overview of weekly developments in this country, in particular for those who might be interested in capitalizing on opportunities available here. My overall feeling is that major developments in the economic area, in the economy, or market, in relations to international, or in regards to international entrants or potential entrants here, all are happening with a so-called backdrop of ongoing new way of sanctions, which you, Tate, just mentioned. And obviously, at the political level, there are some countermeasures, but more importantly, what that brings to market players, existing market players, both Russians in their own country and international businesses, which are already here capitalizing on what's available here. And there is a definite trend which been identified recently by a number of local media that cause to de-dollarization, if you like, how it's called. Finally, the government is moving forward towards more stringent measures to support national currency. And last week or 10 days, we saw quite a number of developments that way. First, it's definitely been an input made by the Central Bank of Russia, which regulates most of banking rules in this country once they're applied by commercial banks. And one of those was significant decreasing physical feasibility opportunities to issue other than Russian ruble currency loans. Definitely, it's mostly about US dollar. And in reality, in light of zero inflation in this month, we actually witnessed that. It's the first time in my history, at least that's what I remember since 1991, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, the first time when the inflation is considered to be at zero level. And the currency loans these days is mainly issued both to businesses and individuals on being quoted in rubles mostly. Reasons for that, obviously, the business-driven reasons to support them. First, it's foreign exchange risks, which are supposed to be diminished, and they are, as we see. At the political level, it's obviously the intent to reduce Russia's dependence on US currency. In the last couple of years, it's been done pretty much from some, if I'm not mistaken, some 500 million dollars deposits in American treasuries. It's been decreased to nearly 100. Again, I'm not an economist, but that's quite a good figure. And many businesses actually want the government to move forward to invest those money rather in more lucrative businesses with the government support, rather than keeping them in US treasury on the other side of the ocean. On the other hand, it's obviously an increased number and practices, and that's what might be interesting to international players, an increased trend in trade, bilateral trade between certain countries. We already witnessed trading with rubles and yuans with China in the last couple of years. For example, Alibaba selling everything in rubles these days in the last 2 or 3 years, which never was in history. And Alibaba is one of the biggest competitors of the Russian monster, Zon.ru. And this month, at the government level, there is another country seriously joining this pool, which is Turkey. Turkey it's actually a really good sign, because Turkey historically and Turkish businesses are very much active in this country. I think it's kind of a genealogy, because Turks are business people by the fact of birth in the first place, as I consider them, and it's not finalized yet. It's supposed to be finalized somewhere by mid-October at the intergovernment committee meetings. Now it's a finalization of paperwork's happening, but businesses on both sides definitely will benefit out of it. And from my point of view, not as a consultant, but rather an entrepreneur in this market, I would love to deal with any country in rubles. And here is why. Russia has floating Russian ruble, or easily exchangeable Russian ruble, without government support or backup. Realistically, just for 2 years. Well, it was easily convertible for over 20 years, but in reality, we basically talk about 2 years when Putin said no more support. It's supposed to be a market trade. As its consequence, if some of you remember, ruble devalued twice, but since then it stays very stable, approximately $1 to 60 rubles plus minus, and currency fluctuations. So this way, as a market player, I can attest, it is much easier for me to deal with rubles because I avoid dealing with extra government authorities called currency control bodies. There is not pain in the ass, sorry for telling you this, but that's true. To deal with them, is realistically, you have to just inform them about the nature of your deal and what they do. Normally monitor market players to avoid shady transactions or capital fleet. But these days, if it's paid in rubles, it saves my time in avoiding unnecessary paperwork. It's not taking realistically a lot of paperwork once, probably a couple hours in 3 years, but nevertheless, it's just extra burden. It's not even a burden, it's just formalities, but it's much easier. And this way we can see, as I said, with Turkish contractors, we can see obvious new trends, like one of those attractions of the Russian market for international players is definitely production localization because of the cheap manpower in this country. So Kamaz, if some of you ever heard about Paris-Dakar rally, they definitely heard this Russian brand heavy trucks Kamaz, which is the biggest manufacturer in this country, set up a joint venture with a Turkish spare parts manufacturer called Tirsan Karadan to produce Karadan shafts for automotive industry or local consumptions in the beginning, which is quite interesting. Another trend with Turkish contractors is we're expecting the lift of the last, I think, on the list of bans Russia enforced against Turkey a couple of years ago after that sad accident in a year on the border of Syria and Turkey when the Turkish fighter hit a Russian bomber and one pilot died. Actually, there are a few less known brands which are going in this direction. So more publications you can find in my LinkedIn group called Market Entry and Business in Russia, where the business cases are actually displayed. Import substitution, as I used to be calling it, it's one of Mr. Putin's mantras as a Russian response to Western sanctions 3.5 years ago. Now, import substitution concept these days could be considered under a little bit different angle and purely practical one, as I can see it. Namely, in the last 2 years, according to Shipta.com, mm, which is quite famous play with evaluating cross-border and e-commerce in this country. They identify a dramatic increase of Russian-made goods sales outside of the country, mainly onto the continent of Europe, for two reasons: cheaper prices and higher quality, which are realistically a very great, just good sign that it's the market niche or investment attraction field is increasing. And that's where I can see a lot of opportunities for international market entrants to capitalize on the existing uh, competences, just to bring their competence and apply it on the Russian ground. Because, as I said, of the costs of cheaper yet highly educated manpower and so forth. Next. That's a very interesting trend and consequence. As I said, August this year is the first time we witness zero level inflation. The other side of the coin is that quite a number of Russian banks are not prepared for zero. Believe it or not. Those guys at the top, including major players, used to be dealing with quite a good share of profit, or reselling Western loans when they were allowed to, or reselling central bank loans. They were buying cheaper financing and reselling to businesses. When it's zero inflation, it is very difficult to convince your consumers, because you cannot just give any interest rates you want. And there is an article placed in my group. It's yet in Russian, but it's interesting how the government look at it and how local businesses react to it. So I'm sure that it will be sorted pretty soon, and we already saw, which was not yet on the market, like mortgage rate at 6%, 5%. Yeah, it's for the Western countries, it's supposed to be quite high, but not for this country. And mortgage rates going down, down, down. And in this month, we witnessed that as well. Now we can see that businesses and with commercial financing, commercial loans also start enjoying more attractive financing. So, by the way, coming back to the sanctions issue, cutting Western financing after 3.5 years of sanctions didn't work out, for sure. And there's quite a number of analysts, including the ones sitting in the government and parliament, pitch the idea to actually capitalize more on advantages generated by those sanctions. Another news, which is quite not necessarily daunting but interesting, is Vesti, which is one of the federal newspapers since our times, indicated that China announced a shale gas reserve and call itself as number 3 in the world after the United States and Canada, which might be a threat to the biggest Gazprom contracts, which is a schedule for the next 30 years for over $400 billion sales, and Power of Siberia, pipeline, which is being built as we speak. Well, it's just a focus, so we'll see what is happening that way. As I said, just to finish it up, there's quite a number of other interesting issues on which was happening, definitely positive ways, as I can see it, uh, under the perspective of international market entrants. But I would briefly like to outline what might be of interest to international businesses if they consider developing their business either in this country or entering this country or with this country. Definitely, there are at least two guaranteed profitable areas, and they're still growing. It's agriculture. It's obviously experiencing a boom in this country, and I already talked about it before. Plus anything related with domestic production of agro-industry supply chain. The secondary is definitely anything related with IT and digital economy. While Russia in the first place has quite a lot of manpower and technological opportunities this year, but as we all know, that IT and technologies, it's the area which is being developed every second, and realistically, just to give you a rough comparison benchmarking, companies using local manpower or Russian professionals applying their core competence and selling their products either on the local market or ideally on the existing markets, let's say an American selling the kind of IT product produced here and on the existing market, considered to be 3 to 5 times less expensive than the United States. So that's definite competitive advantage this area. And why I mentioned about once again about import substitution. Any products, any niches which are involved to substitute the products which been banned from this country as a Russian response 3 years ago proved to be very marginable when selling either on a local market or Eurasian Economic Union, or even better, outside to the existing markets. So when we talk about opportunities, and I already mentioned that before in one of my online appearances, it's quite a question. It's quite difficult to identify the list of or exhaustive list of opportunities available to international players, because it is being updated every day. It's the list is growing. So for those who might find it interesting, I would recommend to just use one of the links below and book their free consultation with me. I would definitely devote my time and give this consultation and give my feelings about your prospects. It's non-obligatory. It might be just one of the opportunities which you could consider. Don't forget, no matter what mainstream media says, this is a very stable economic environment. It's one of those triple mantras Mr. Putin been evangelizing since 2000 when he came to the power. and existing market players, I believe, would confirm it. I can talk about on this topic for quite a long, so I'll try to stop for now. So thank you very much indeed for your time. I hope those hints or my thoughts and Tate's views on today's happening in this country might be of use for some of you. I hope. Um, if if you if you like our appearing, please do us a favor. Subscribe to this channel. Help us to expand on YouTube and digital area. Give me your feedback in the forum section whenever you find this video. It could be on YouTube, could be somewhere else, and on Facebook and my blog or whatever it is. Give me a thumbs up. If you don't like it, give me a thumbs down. Just please give me your feedback. That's really first inspiring, and second, it gives a market reaction to me or shares an idea with me on the topics which might be of interest to those who consider dealing with this market. And if you have nothing to do with the Russian market, perhaps you can share this video with those who might benefit out of it. And if you like this video, there is a bell icon below. Tap it and you'll be informed when the next video is coming. So thank you very much indeed for your time and being with us. Good luck, and I look forward to see you very soon. See you. Bye.